Hello, hello. Welcome to English Extras. My name is Jean. If you're here, it's because you don't want to sound like a textbook. You're in the right place. This podcast is to help intermediate and advanced learners find alternatives to textbook English so you can express yourself authentically. Before we begin, if you want the transcript for this episode, you can follow the link in the description. Reading and listening at the same time is a great way to improve your English, and I also include definitions of words and phrases I use in the episode, as well as example sentences at the end of each transcript. Ready? Let's begin. I don't know about you, but I always try to be as polite as possible. Very likely, this has something to do with being raised in the South, meaning the southeastern region of the United States. The South is often stereotyped as being overly polite, where teaching children manners is a priority. Manners, by the way, refers to polite behavior. If you hear the expression, mind your manners, it means, oh, you should behave better. Mind your manners. In this episode, we're going to talk about ways you can show politeness in English. Now, before we get started, I want to say that I'm going to share very general ways to be polite, but polite is a relative term and deeply related to culture, meaning that what is considered polite in one culture may not be polite in a different culture. And there are many different cultures even within one country. So, in this episode, I'm going to discuss behaviors that are generally seen as polite in America, but I am definitely coming from a Southern perspective. Bear that in mind as we continue. In some languages and cultures, using the word you when talking to someone is too direct. It's impolite. These languages will instead use the person's title, which is more indirect and therefore more polite. So there's a connection between directness and politeness. But of course, different languages and cultures will choose different variations of this relationship. For example, in English, calling someone by their first name can be too direct, too personal. So it can be seen as impolite. Of course, it depends on context. In this case, we often use a title word plus the last name. This is more indirect and therefore more polite. These titles also give information about who the person is. For example, if you hear doctor plus a name, this tells you this person has either a Doctor of Medicine degree or a PhD. If you hear senator plus a name, this tells you this person is currently a politician, specifically a member of the Senate. Now, there are some languages like Mandarin Chinese, for example, that use teacher as a title. As far as I know, we don't do this in English at all. For teachers, we use Ms., Mrs., or Mr. Let me explain what these are. Mr. is used with a last name to politely address a man. My father, for example, would be called Mr. Thomas by strangers. Mrs. is used with a last name to politely address a married woman. The married part is very important because for women, there are several different titles that all signal a woman's marital status, meaning if the woman is married or not. So because I am married, I'm called Mrs. plus my last name. For women who are not married, in other words, for unmarried women, we can use Miss. You might notice that my brand is Miss Jean Teaches. Why is it Miss Jean if I'm married? Shouldn't it be Mrs. Jean Teaches? I'll explain more about that in a moment. For now, just know that Miss signals an unmarried woman or girl. Now, about Miss Jean. In the South, a very common way to show respect is to use Miss plus a woman's first name. This is even used with children. It might seem like an odd cultural quirk. In my experience as a teacher, I have confused many female children by calling them Miss plus their first name because in their culture, Miss is for adult women only, not for children. But in the South, in the US, it's a very common thing to do. Miss was traditionally used to signal an unmarried woman, specifically a young unmarried woman. Nowadays, it isn't often used for this purpose. Nowadays, Ms. is more often used because it indicates a woman, but not her marital status. The same way that Mr. indicates a man, but not his marital status. Another common thing to do is use the terms ma'am and sir to address a woman and a man, respectively. Both sir and ma'am do not relate to marriage status. Sir is used for men. Ma'am is used for women. Now, there is a bit of a debate around the use of these words because while they do not relate to marriage status, they do usually relate to age. Now, some people, like myself, believe that sir and ma'am are signs of respect that don't really relate to age. For example, I will say, yes, ma'am, to people older than me, my friends, or children. For me, ma'am is a signal of respect regardless of age. However, there are some people who believe that ma'am is a signal that the speaker thinks you are old. Same thing for sir. In fact, you can see this phenomenon in movies and shows, and not only recent ones. One example that comes to mind is from the 1992 film A Few Good Men. It's a military court drama. The main character is played by Tom Cruise. In the military, of course, sir and ma'am are deeply embedded in the culture. So when a Marine continues to address Tom Cruise's character as sir, Tom Cruise's character replies, "You say sir, and I turn around and look for my father." This phenomenon is also very prevalent among women. Some women don't want to be called ma'am because they believe it's a signal that they are old. You can see an example of this in the first episode of the 2012 TV series, The Newsroom. A news producer, played by Emily Mortimer, is talking to a younger woman. This younger woman calls her ma'am, and Emily Mortimer's character replies, "Ma'am, how old do I look?" So there's some debate on this, but at the end of the day, it's all a matter of opinion. Some people don't prefer sir or ma'am, and some do. It depends on personal preference, which is often tied to culture. Like I said, the use of sir and ma'am are deeply embedded in Southern culture as well as Black culture. Now, let's talk about different ways you can phrase requests to be more polite. When you want someone to do something for you, I recommend using could you. Could you. Sometimes these words are clearly pronounced, and sometimes it sounds like could you with a J sound. Could you. Could is a bit more formal and polite than can when used in a question. Could you help me find something? Could you help me find something? Could you turn your music down a little bit? Could you turn your music down a little bit? Then there's the ambiguous phrase, would you mind? Would you mind? Would you does the same thing as could you with sounds. It could sound like would you, or it could sound like would you with a j sound. Would you? Native speakers struggle with this phrase, even though it's used quite often. Would you mind means something like, does it bother you? Or is it a problem? If you say, would you mind helping me with something? There are two ways this question could be interpreted. The first meaning is, does it bother you to help me? Or is it a problem for you to help me? And the second meaning is simply, can you help me? The intent of this phrase is to give the other person the opportunity to refuse to say no. The phrase, would you mind, signals that you know you are potentially inconveniencing the other person. Here's where the ambiguity comes in. Let's take the question, would you mind helping me? Remember, there are two meanings to this phrase. The first, does it bother you to help me? Or is it a problem for you to help me? The second, can you help me? Some people will say no, but they mean yes, because they are answering the would you mind part of the question, meaning no, I don't mind. I don't mind means that they are okay with the request. Some people will say yes because they are answering the implied meaning of can you help me and not the would you mind part, meaning yes, they will help you. But it isn't immediately obvious which part of the question they are responding to. This ambiguity creates confusion all the time among native speakers. It happens especially when someone answers with a one word, yes or no. It's much easier if the person answers, no, I don't mind, or yes, how can I help? But not everyone does. So be prepared to ask a clarifying question. Yes, you do mind? Or no, you don't mind? You can hear an example of this type of question in one of my favorite movies, the 1998 romantic comedy You've Got Mail, starring Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. During one scene, Meg Ryan's character is sitting in a cafe. She's waiting for someone to arrive. While she's waiting, a stranger comes to her table, grabs the empty chair, and asks, would you mind if I borrow this chair? And she quickly answers, yes, I do mind. I'm expecting somebody. Now, let's move on to some other useful phrases. Let's say you're making a request to someone and you don't want them to feel pressured to hurry, hurry, hurry. A great phrase to add to a request is no rush. No rush. Or you can also use no hurry. No hurry. I do this often when I want my dad to call me. I'll send him a message saying, hey, give me a call when you get a moment. No rush. There's another useful phrase. When you get a moment. When you get a moment. This operates the same way no rush does. It is a signal that you don't want the other person to feel like you want them to hurry, hurry, hurry. I often use this phrase when I'm in a restaurant. If I need something, like more water, for example, I'll ask the server, when you get a second, could I get another water? There are several variations of this phrase. When you get a moment, when you get a moment, when you get a minute, when you get a minute, when you get a second, when you get a second, when you get a sec, when you get a sec being short for second. All of these signal you don't want the other person to hurry. I'll leave you with this rule of thumb. The longer and more indirect your question is, the more polite it typically is. The shorter and more direct your question is, the more impolite it can be. And like always, this isn't true 100% of the time. It depends on where you are and who you are talking to. If you're up north in a place like New York City, it's probably okay to be more direct. If you're in the South in a place like Atlanta, it's probably better to use more polite phrases and use ma'am and sir more often. So there you have it. As always, if you have any questions, please send me a message through Instagram or my email. If you'd like the transcript for this episode, you can find a link for that in the description. Transcripts include an episode summary, as well as definitions and example sentences of terms and phrases I used in this episode. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.